It's No Driving Gloves on July 4th, 2024. It being a Thursday holiday, we can't live stream tonight. So what we're doing, we're bringing back the past. And as a matter of fact, we're going back to the very first episode of No Driving Gloves with Derek, John, and Will. This is from back in June 2017 when we launched the show. We weren't doing video at the time, so you'll have to deal with a montage of video clips and pictures that show up throughout the video episode if you're watching the video episode. If you're in for the audio, it's a replay, and you can revisit where we started from, and maybe you can see how we've grown. But before I jump into this replay episode, in the background, if you're watching the video, I have a Tesla Model 3 pictured and saying Happy 4th, the launch edition. And the reason a Tesla, I said Model 3 is shown is the Tesla Model Y and the Tesla Model 3 are the most American-made cars on the market today, followed closely by a Honda Passport, a Volkswagen ID4, the Model S, a Honda Odyssey, a Honda Ridgeline, a Toyota Camry. Finally, at number 8, the Jeep Gladiator pickup truck is really the most American-made internal combustion engine vehicle from a traditionally thought of American manufacturer. The next traditionally thought of American manufacturer falls in at number 19 with Ram and their 1500 Classic pickup, not the 1500 pickup, the Classic, their entry level, no text, no frills model. And you're going, well, where do other trucks fall in? Because aren't trucks American? As a matter of fact, the F-150 Lightning will join us at number 56 on this list. The F-150 Hybrid joins us at number 75 on this list. The Chevy Silverado and the Sierra 1500 join us at 89 and 90. It's hard to say, and I really don't want to use the line, but we need to start thinking. Let's buy American. This is July 4th. Let's be patriotic. Let's look at this. I mean, these Hondas are made in Alabama. The Toyota, I believe, is built in California, but the Teslas are built in California and Texas. So we just need to look at this. I just thought it was an interesting little fact. This information is from cars.com and reflecting the 2023 model year. Oh, I finally found the Ford F-150, and it's at number 58 on this list. So just below the Lightning, which was number 56. But with that, let's jump to the past. And after we've visited the past, you know what to do. Get off your ass, go burn some gas, because we'll be watching fireworks. Later, everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the launch edition of No Driving Gloves, the newest podcast in the automobile hobby. You have John, Derek, and Will with you tonight. We're going to touch on some things. The main topic of conversation we're going to launch into this evening is kind of a discussion of barn finds and what the definition is. I think all three of us have a different take on what a barn find is, what it should be. All of us have had recent experience with various definitions of barn finds, and we all have a different choosing of how we should treat those barn finds in the end. So I'm going to say I got a call mid last summer through our local British Automobile Club. I'm a member of so many different car clubs, it's a little bit ridiculous. And he had a friend that had passed away unexpectedly, and they had this little sports car tucked away in their garage for 10, 15 years that the guy's brother had bought brand new. And the next thing you know, it gets pushed to the back burner. And this was the summer that it was going to get restored. And obviously somebody else had something to say about that. This car came along. So
That's kind of how I get introduced to some of my barn finds. Does anybody have a different take?
Being in the industry in a small community that Big Oak Garage is in, everybody knows that my father and I are into cars. So if something comes up, we're the first place they stop. Had an opportunity, matter of fact, last week to buy a 55 First Series Chevrolet truck. I'd been knowing the truck for a long time. It was 5 miles from the shop. The lady called me, offered me the truck. I went and bought it. So that's generally how we find out about them more than anything in this little small community that we live in. And they're still out there. There's still tons of them out there. You just got to be at the right place at the right time.
What makes yours a barn find? The car I was called about was a 1971 or 72 Lotus 7 Series 4 that literally was parked 20 years ago, and it lived for those 20 years 2 miles next to the largest Lotus collection in the world. Nobody knew that it was there. So it kind of was a find. Did people know about your car, Will, or the truck, or was it just something that somebody had in the barn and it was time to tear it down? I had an old 79 Little Red Express that I had stored in a relative's barn on the old family farm. And when that corn crib was to be torn down a few years ago, I had to make the decision, was I going to actually restore that truck, or was it going to go away? So somebody in Moline, Illinois ended up purchasing a barn find Little Red Express. So it literally was a barn find. But
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a barn find because people knew about it, so to speak. Maybe barn stored. I mean, just about everybody in the community knew about this truck because the man that owned it he was one of the postmen out here. So everybody knew Mr. Lambert's truck. And I just feel fortunate enough to be able that they called me first to buy it. It was not really in a barn. It was in a shed next to their house. I mean, some people call them barns. In the South, a barn is where you store hay and your horses go to eat. So that's another issue. Is it a barn, or is it a shed, or is it a garage? Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, the definition of barn find, everybody is kind of, just loosely using that term, barn as some type of outbuilding that's not the house. About a year and a half ago, I guess I had what I guess I would think of as, or I might refer to as kind of the epitome of a barn find. I had good fortune that a friend out in California was hired to go extract a vehicle from an estate that had been locked away for many, many years, an old farm in Indiana. And while he was there getting an Auburn out of this estate, the owner or the family member, of that property said, well, I got another one out in the barn, the other barn out back, literally a barn that used to have, cows stalls in it, and have, all those, the hay mounds and all the, equipment. A lot of the equipment was still stored in the barn. And behind these, some pieces of equipment, an old carriage that was in there, was this 1923 Peerless. And Peerlesses were built, obviously, up in Cleveland. It was literally stuck in that barn in about 1957 or 58, if I recall correctly. And the good fortune, my friend said, hey, I know the exact guy that would want this car. Let me get a hold of him. And he was able to get in touch with me. And fortunately, Indiana wasn't terribly far from where I was living at the time in Ohio. And I ran over there and checked it out. And literally, I'm being an early car guy, brass era, horseless carriage, classic era. I think in my circle of people I knew, only like 2 other people even knew that this car might exist in Indiana. This car had been lost for a number of years. So it was kind of almost the epitome of a barn find because nobody really knew that car was there, and it finally, kind of saw the light of day again. And, now the Peerless Club stuff, those people that keep track of these cars, we can kind of register that car as still existing.
yeah, see, to me, that is the definition of a barn find. Anymore, it seems, see your television shows, or there's a really popular website right now that they display barn finds and list barn finds for sale. And it seems all you have to do is have a dusty car. You haven't run or started. I mean, I think we used to call the ads when we used to act, before eBay and you had your local classifieds, we called those ran when parked. And that's what a lot of these things seem to be is that, it's a 1986 Dodge Daytona Turbo Z with 6,500 miles on it. It hasn't probably been run since 1988. Well, there might be a reason, because being a fan of 80s front-wheel drive Chrysler products, those head gaskets were a little bit fragile. And, my first car being an 024, I can't tell you how many times, fortunately, my dad paid for a head gasket for me in that car because I was a little bit rough on him. And, that was kind of the problem with the front-wheel drives. But, that's what a barn find is now, just because it was, something my great-grandfather bought and decided not to drive and wasn't going to trade it in and was eventually going to get around to fixing. That to me isn't a barn find. What, Derek, you've given me that, what I would classify as a barn find.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not, well, I guess I could, take the rugs out of the house and go clean, beat them, clean over top of my Falcon, a 61 Ford Falcon, and put it out at the road for, for sale as a barn find, and probably get an extra $1,000 or $2,000 out of it because it's got dust covered. That's I guess that's one of my other takes on the barn find is it seems that term is being used to raise the value of a car when sometimes it really shouldn't.
I don't know if you saw it, Derek, but I think the first time I met you, and it's probably close to 10 years ago now.
Hey, whoa, let's not reveal age.
Was a Mustang event, one of the national 45th or 50th or 40th anniversary Mustang things. And one of our local gentlemen brought out a Shelby Mustang. It was a 350 Hertz edition car, and he sat it up in one of the areas of the show field that might have been the race paddock. And he put some hay bales out and everything, and the windshield was dusty and, kind of made it look like this barn find because he hadn't used the car in about 20 years, and the barn find term was just beginning the rise in its popularity. But this was a car he had bought new, he had used. Matter of fact, it had a trailer hitch on it that he welded on in like 67 or 68. I guess he didn't buy it new. He bought it when Hertz sold him off. And he used to tow his race car around with the thing. He didn't think of it more than just, a pickup truck at the time. It's set up as this revered barn find. I don't know if you saw that at the event. There might be a picture of it somewhere in my, thousands of digital pictures,
Yeah, that event was so long ago. I don't remember. I know I remember not getting to leave the building very much because I was traveling with two cars that we were watching over.
Yeah.
But I seem to remember a little bit of possibly seeing that car out on the field and kind of thinking that's a little weird.
That's as bad as putting the crybaby dolls out on your tires.
I don't know if it's that bad. At one point in time, those were cool too. But as a guy who does woodworking as a hobby, run one of those things through a bandsaw, put it in the front yard for $19.95. Somebody's going to buy it that afternoon.
if you're hauling around, if you're hauling around hay bales for your car show display, I mean, come on.
Oh, come on, mister. I bring ramps and mirrors and, strobe lights.
But hay bales?
Well, hey, if you've got a 1930 Model A pickup, and you got them in the back to sit on, it's okay. It's okay. If you're using them around your 1972 Mustang, no.
No. Well, I guess hay is for horses. So.
Taking the pony cars to new levels.
Yeah. Instead of, what you do, Will, with setting up your ramps and all your, axle stands, getting the car up, getting the mirrors, I'm going to take my Peerless out, put a couple hay bales under it, jack it up, set it on them, take the wheels off, put some mirrors under there.
Get some little pygmy goats. It'd be a petting zoo.
What's, everybody's intention with their barn finds? The Lotus, I personally chose not to exercise my right to purchase on it. I could have got a heck of a deal, but I just didn't want to take the time to restore it. I want to come home and drive my cars. So, it was acquired by the museum that I'm with, and our intention is to do kind of a cleanup preservation. Being a local car, it's a really nice artifact to have, and it fits in with the collection. It'll be running and driving and brought back to a new condition, but not necessarily restored to showroom new. We're doing it as a museum and educational tool, so people can experience and see and hear and smell the way these cars were when they were built. What are your plans, Derek or Will?
I can jump in. Obviously, coming from the museum world, trained in conservation, and my aim is to preserve the car as much as possible. It's a pretty solid car, having been put away for so long. It's a lot of original pieces and components and finishes. It's the original interior, although it's kind of tore up by the raccoons that were in the barn. It's the original California top, which is, for anybody that doesn't know what that is, that's a non-removable, non-folding, basically what looks like convertible top. So it looks like a touring car, but the top does not fold down and it does not come off, anything like that. It actually has its original plate glass side curtains that go in to make it basically into a full sedan. The paint, I question paint. I don't know that it's the original paint. It looks to be probably a repaint. Obviously, I got to do more testing and research on it. My goal is to go through the engine, all the mechanicals, transmission, rear end, get it all running properly, make sure everything's solid, basically stabilize the body for structural safety, and repaint what has to be repainted, which right now are the fenders and running boards, because they were removed by the owner that stuck it in the barn, and he was going to restore the car. Unfortunately passed away about 6 months after he got the car, so those have been already stripped. So those will get repainted, and I'm just going to put the car back together and drive the wheels off of it. I'm going to preserve it, but I'm also going to use it, drive it, and get it out there so people can see it.
I think this is probably an opportune time, not to probably cut Will off, but we use these terms, and for you and I, Derek especially, and even Will, he has some of the restoration background. Go into a little bit of the definition for listeners who might not be aware of exactly what would constitute a preservation. Restorations have their different levels of taking it back to showroom new or a particular point in time, things like that. When you say preservation, go a little bit more into detail, because being your museum background and conserving and preservation, kind of go into that. So as the podcast goes on, these terms will be referred to. We'll redefine them over as we go along too. But let's start this off right and not leave people wondering for a few episodes.
Yeah. Let's start this off with me being the guy that everybody hates. Got it. Obviously, coming from the museum end of things, it's a little different world than your typical, automotive collector restoration world. In the preservation end of things, conservation conservators that's the profession of preservation. You've got your art conservators in the art museum world, your objects conservators, all these different types of conservators. And what we're aiming to do is preserve the object in the condition that essentially the museum receives it in, if it's in good enough condition. We will restore objects. We do that in the museum world, and we can get into a talk on that too. But preservation is really using, and what we do is we use reversible treatments as much as possible. So anything we do to the object, so in this case, a vehicle, a car, is reversible. Any of the adhesives we use to, adhere loose paint back down, we can actually take that adhesive back off and the paint would be loose again. It's a weird world, I know, but that's kind of the idea, is to preserve it at a certain point in its life. And then, when we get into restorations, obviously we do almost the same thing. We try to restore a vehicle or an object back to a certain point in its life. be it, when the moment it rolled off the assembly line, or in the case of, I worked on the project to bring the 1965 Lotus Type 38 that Jim Clark drove to victory at the Indianapolis 565, kind of managed a big part of that project. And we aimed to restore that car to the moment it crossed the finish line, and nothing better. And, than that, we didn't want it to be a 100-point concours restoration. We wanted it to represent a moment in time. I don't know if that's a clear enough definition, but that's kind of the quick rundown.
It's a good definition, and I don't want people to think that you're the bad guy, because remember, I played in the museum conservation world between restoration careers when I was with the shop in Virginia to my present job. I stopped off and played in the museum conservation world and wasn't necessarily playing with cars, more like big boats and rocket ships and statues. It is a different world and a unique world, and I think that's part of this podcast, is to educate people on some of the differences that we'll discuss as time goes on. Well, now that Derek's talked about gluing his paint back on so that he can unglue it in the future, and me talking about, we might make it look new, what are you going to do with your pickup truck?
Well, I'm going to do what I call preserve it. No, what I plan on doing with it is build myself a shop truck. I have generally I'll build a shop truck every couple of years, and then somebody winds up having to have it worse than me, and I sell it, and then I kick myself in the butt. So then I build another one. So it'll be my next little shop truck. I'm going to leave a straight axle under the front, but I will use a dropped axle and drop leaf springs, disc brakes. I'll take that engine out, and I'm going to put a 261 out of a 57 two-ton truck. I'll make it all EFI, fuel injected, 6-speed manual transmission, disc brakes on the back. I'll probably do a 4-link with coilovers or something like that on the back, and put a later model rear end under it, and just really drive it and enjoy it, and really not cut anything up on it. Just it's such a good truck, and it's got cool history. I'm not going to do anything that can't really be reversed if somebody would want to put it back original. But I'm in the hot rod industry, so we're into taking an older car and making it drive and handle and stop and perform like a late model car. I'm not going to the extreme with this one, but generally that's what we do. So just something cool to put around town in, run to the parts store, or if I need to go to a show in Nashville or Columbus, Ohio, or something like that, and hop in it and drive up there.
Things like that make sense to do, in my humble opinion, because you put that truck together so that it can be used and driven and seen. That's what gets the youth involved, because all of a sudden they see this cool truck. I know my 13-year-old stepdaughter, she goes crazy over the 50s era trucks when she sees them going down the road. But if it wasn't for people that made them usable on kind of a daily basis, or the shop trucks, she'd never be exposed to that, and she would live in the worlds of Hondas and things like that. So that works. And then we'll say Derek's is just as justified, because it's really preserving history, and it shows people the way the cars were done. We might hate street rodders when they cut up such and such a car, but my argument's always been, I had the opportunity to buy that car just as much as the guy that's cutting it up. And as long as it's not the last one in the world, I guess it's okay.
And that's what I was going to say. Sometimes it really comes down to what the car is. My 23 Peerless that I pulled out of a barn, right now, the Peerless Club, we know of like 6 or 7 of them that exist. It's one of the early American automobiles with a factory V8 engine. It would be heartbreaking for someone to cut that up and turn it into a hot rod. But you find a 50s era, Chevy pickup, Ford pickup, there's, thousands upon hundreds of thousands of those built. There's still thousands of them that exist. I think sometimes it does come down to, be smart with, the vehicle you have, and if there's some significance behind it, maybe don't cut it up into a hot rod. If it's another Model T, hot rod it.
What if the Peerless that you own, what if it was missing half the body parts, the engine transmission was gone, the front axle was gone, it was just basically kind of a hull of a car? Would there be enough parts out there to put it back so it appeared original? Or what would you do in a situation like that? Would you, maybe put a late model drivetrain in it and get the outside looking as original as possible with, made panels for it? Would you do something like that, or just, I don't know, it's just something I've always wondered. If you do find a car like that and half of it's gone, what do you do with it?
No, that's a cool question, actually. I think with something as rare as the V8 Peerless, had I found out about that car and it was in that kind of condition, missing a bunch of parts, the way I approach that is, someone that owns one of those cars, that has one restored or is restoring it, those are good parts to make sure that other car is put together with original components and original parts. So I would have probably tried to find that car a home with another owner of one of those cars. But on the flip side of things, going to what you're talking about, actually, my father and I have been restoring cars and working on cars for years. He owns a restoration shop. We actually have a 1928 Marmon Model 68 sedan, and it was one of the project cars that were, kind of sitting waiting, and we had it outside waiting, we were moving stuff around in the shop. This is when I still lived back home, and we were building an expansion onto the shop and had a tree service come in that was supposed to top a tree down and bring it down in sections. And they decided it was quicker and easier to cut it down in whole. And they cut it down in whole right across the 28 Marmon. So it crushed the body. It blew, of course, 20s cars, they've got wood frame inside of them with the steel body, the sheet metal body over top. And there were splinters of the wood frame for the body all over the yard. So, what kind of is the plan for that? It's got a full steel structure under the original body now. And we were able to kind of pull the metal back out and work it back out. And the plan with that, now that it's had that much damage done to it, we had to build basically a steel, internal framework for the body, is to kind of do something with a late model driveline, but keep it looking more original. We've actually toyed around with the ideas of maybe like a Jaguar engine, because they kind of have that look of the earlier engine blocks, the inline sixes they had, and some of that, just to kind of give it the look of, maybe somebody that doesn't know anything about cars would be fooled, but, make it drive like a more modern car. So, I'm one of those people that with some cars, I'm like, hey, I got to preserve this thing or restore it back to original. And in other cases, there are those times where you just got to do something with it, and heck, why not have a little fun?
Exactly.
Yeah, I've worked in the commercial restoration, worked for a shop. We had, everybody was a client of ours. And in answer to your question, Will, when you're into that world, it's kind of like your world. How much money do you have?
That's right.
If you brought me that Peerless and it was missing half the body, and the crankcase was missing, and the block was cracked and things like that, what are you going to do with it? If you've got enough money, we can build that car again.
That's true.
Will you make your money back? Probably not, because if you take any car in the world, street car with an interior, I think the baseline is 2,000 hours to do a frame-off restoration. I don't care if it's a 55 Chevrolet pickup that's worth $20,000 when you're done, or a $1.5 million Duesenberg. They're all 2,000 hours, provided you don't have to make any parts, provided there's no corrosion, and it's $100 an hour. So you're going to have $200,000 into that $20,000 Chevy. You're going to have $200,000 into that $1.5 million Duesenberg. Granted, the parts that's labor. Yeah. The parts are going to be a little bit differing in the factors, but if you wanted to have that Peerless and that was your car, and you remember, a date in it, or your grandfather or great grandfather had one and it was in this picture with them and you want it back and money's no object, you do it that way. Or a lot of times, the rod shop saves them. Granted, they cut them up and change things about them, but the car's still here and they still help display the line. So it really goes back to, in the commercial world, the for-profit world, unless money's no object, it's whatever serves best. And Derek's right, it's usually better for those cars to give up all of their parts to save somebody else, being literally organ donors for another car. There's a lot of parts there, and they could go over to the few remaining cars. Hopefully, things like that go to the right people with their hearts in the right places for the historical aspect. But there's been some very talented people make some very wonderful creations out of some very rare cars. So it's, to each his own. And, I don't knock a guy for, excuse me, cutting up a 41 Lincoln. I don't knock a guy for spending more than what his 1981 Chevrolet truck is worth so that he can have a mint condition, square-bodied Chevy. So you do what you like, and you go around once, make yourself happy.
True that.
We can get as accurate when it comes to the conservation. I did a preservation on the Lotus 27. It was raced in the 1962 season and put up in that fall, and never turned a wheel ever again. Went through a couple of collectors' hands, ended up in our collection, and we decided we wanted to make the vehicle run, which involved changing some of the rubber parts, disassembling the motor, going through the motor. Every bolt I took out of that car, my notes are anal enough that every bolt went back into the exact same hole it came out of. I did not necessarily get the head positions of the bolts the exact same, but, what you do, what your budget allows or what time allows, and what your end purpose is. And with that car, our end purpose was to have a vehicle that represented the car as it left the track in October of 1962. And that's, again, restoring, or in this case preserving, to that point in time. We didn't fix any of the body cracks. We didn't remove any of the adhesives. I used a chemical solution to remove the corrosion that was beginning to peek its way through some of the chrome on the suspension components to neutralize that corrosion. But instead of having to strip them, you go back and you use a product from the conservation world, which is a clear sealant that is removable, but it also prevents those from corroding again. So we still have the proper chrome plating and things on it. There's just all kinds of ways to approach this, and each case is different. And there's 3 of us here, and really, I bet we come from 6 different worlds when in approaching projects.
Yeah, we definitely do. Yeah. But sorry, Will. I was just going to jump in. Right. John said something I think really important there, which is, when we're doing the preservation of one of these cars, safety is always first.
Oh yeah.
And that's, on my Peerless, on the Lotus, on whatever car we're talking about, all of those, safety pieces of equipment, the brakes, all of those, the rubber components, those are being essentially restored because you want to be safe. You're going to use, as close to original style of parts, components, things like that you can, but you're going to make sure that when you're out, that car is stopping, that car is safe to be out on the road, running, doing what it needs to do. From the world I come in from, safety is, I always put safety first, especially you're dealing with museum collections. Sometimes we're running cars that are one of a kind. We want to make sure those cars are going to stop if they need to stop and do what they're supposed to do. And they're, the engine's not going to have some catastrophic issue and throw a rod through the side of the block. So even though we talk about preservation as kind of, we got to keep that car as original as possible and treat it a certain way, we're still going to make it safe.
Yeah, safety's number one for us too. I mean, we're trusting a guy that's going to be driving his car 80 miles an hour down the road. He's going to be keeping up with traffic. He's going to be driving to California and back. And, that's something we don't take very lightly. It's got to run, got to stop. And, got to keep up with traffic and not run hot and leave them stranded. And, that's very, very, very high on our list of things. So, and, going back to the preservation and restoration, at the end of the day, if the guy's got enough money and he wants a restored Peerless and say a hot rod Peerless, you can create a hot rod Peerless from the steel that comes in on the steel truck. You can build your own chassis, you can build a body, you can build an exact replica of that Peerless. That's a hot rod. And you didn't hurt nobody, but he's got a hot rod and he's got an original. If that's something that somebody's wanting to do, that's something that definitely can be done nowadays.
Yeah, but this, I guess, you learned in the commercial shops. This is America, and we can put a new motor in a car, we can put new axles, we can put new tires, we can put new wheels, we can put new upholstery, we can put new gauges, we can put new wood, but you better give me that body. There was an instance we were working on a Jaguar XK120, and literally we were putting it up on the jack stands to begin disassembly, and the car broke in half. And that happens. I could have ordered a body out of England for $80,000, but that wasn't going to be the car to that guy. We were putting an interior, we were putting a top, everything else was going to be new in this car. It was just the way the car was. But he had to have that body, so he had his body with all the rust repair, all the rust gone, but there's just nothing left. And that's one of the funny things is, people get attached to certain things. If we were discussing this and we were living in the United Kingdom, it would be different because throwing a new body into, a Mini restoration or a Jaguar restoration or an MG restoration, there's companies over there stamping new bodies. And fortunately, I'm going to say Will's industry and the street rod industry, I think that's going to become a little bit more the norm in North America now that we have companies producing the full bodies for Chevelles and Camaros and Mustangs. And, you can literally pick up a catalog now and order every single part to build a 1968 Camaro without ever starting with a 1968 Camaro. It all can come in on the little brown truck and maybe a semi for the body. But so it's just as the world goes along, and it's again the definitions of everything is we started talking about barn finds, and here we are talking about
brand new
different. Now we're talking about mail ordering, the internet world, 28 Peerless and metal over wood bodies and things like that, and I've brought it to here. Let me get on Amazon and order you a '69 Camaro.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because we have a '56 Chevrolet in the shop right now. That's a brand new body, a brand new chassis. I mean, nothing.
Well, and it's not even the late model. I mean, you can go to a catalog and buy everything you need to build a Model T Ford.
Yeah, well,
chassis, body, engine, boom, done. I mean, you can build a brand new Model T Ford.
I guarantee you there's twice as many 32 Fords running on the road right now than Henry Ford ever produced. and Brookville sells probably 2 or 3 a day. I mean, they're all steel, stamped out just like the way Henry did it. And they sell like hotcakes. I mean, it's not a Henry body, but they don't sell for much less.
There's not many Henry bodies left that are either not in a collection where they've been properly restored, or they're in a collection where they've been heavily modified. So, and Brookville does a great job with their bodies and, the pieces they do. So it's just, this car world's an interesting hobby. I think that's why we're here, talking about it. And hopefully you're here listening.
Well, I hope it's interesting, or else people are going to be really bored, John.
We've got a Henry body 32 Ford Roadster coming in the shop next week, matter of fact.
You seem to stay busy up there, so.
Got plenty to do.
He's good at just going in and cutting the cars up and putting those new engines in, all that good stuff. So keeps him busy over there.
That's right. That's what we do. Hot rods.
Now, We can pick on Will a little bit, Derek, because it's easy. He can do whatever he wants. I was give a shout out to the MakerCast podcast. Recently was a guest on it, and he was kind of talking about when you go in and you're making something for these cars, or you're making that part that's unobtainium that doesn't exist, but you've got to make it. He said, well, you can just go in and do this and do that and do that. I said, no. The guy, say the race car engineer in 1955, when he was working on this race car, he could go in and make this modification. And so I can go in and make this modification. And no, I can't. I've got to go back and I've got to put myself in the head of that engineer from 1955 and make the part he made. He had creative license to do whatever he wanted to. I have to research what was done so it's done properly. And, that adds a little bit to the complications on what we do. Not saying what Will does is easy, but it's, he has a little bit more creative license, I think, that in the rod industry than the restoration industry. Now I'll let Will yell at me for saying that, but
hey, I tell you, it is difficult still being cool, but being different than everybody else. Because your car's still got to have the look. It's still got to set right. It's got to have the right wheels. But being a little bit different than the guy that's parked next to you to win that award, or to make your customer be like, well, my car looks just like his. It's tough. And, that's one of the hardest things that we struggle with is what are we going to do to this 56 Chevrolet that hadn't been done before, but still be cool. And it's kind of hard to deal with sometimes.
Well, it amazed me. I think one of the first times I visited your shop, we'll talk about the car in a future episode, but you talked about, sectioning a 1/2 inch out here and shortening a fender 2 inches or 4 inches, and things you don't notice until it's next to something else, or you look at that original thing. And for you to go in and say, hey, if we take 2 inches out of this fender and shorten it just that much, and to know where to take it out of the fender, and that's that creative artistry that personally I don't know if I will ever have. I'm really good at recreating the past, but I'm not really good at designing something new. I'm too rigid in my thinking. It has to be done this way. And that is, it's an amazing talent you have and your team has. I know it's not all you. You have your, designers and that, but you have the final say. I mean, your name's on the door, so to speak. And what, if you make the call and you make it wrong, that affects the food on the table for the next couple of years for you, because it takes a couple of years to recover from those mistakes in your industry.
One of the biggest things is proportions. A car, you have to be able to pass your eye over a custom car and nothing slaps you in the face. It's just got to flow. And that's one of the biggest things is if you're building a tail dragger, everything needs to kind of flow backwards. If you're building a hot rod, everything needs to kind of have a forward motion. We kind of...
But I want to put a picnic table wing on the back of my car. Well, how do we do that?
Well, first off, I'm going to send you down the road, because we're not doing that at Big Oak Garage.
Well, I know that's kind of an insult, but I'll be one of the first to admit, as I got into this world from the hot rod Hondas and motor swaps and things. So while I will jab fun at them, I would not be where I am today without building Hondas. When we were back in college, Will, I know you saw, my CRX with 17-inch wheels and the Japanese motor swap and things like that. And so, it's funny where we all come from and how we get to the places we get. So, hopefully I didn't alienate the listeners with the picnic table wing, but it's I
hope not.
It's one of
I'm gonna take the conversation in a similar direction, but a little different. And John and Will, you can hop into this. Maybe more so John wants to. When we come from preservation, restoration, everything we're talking about here, we look at what Will's doing down at Big Oak Garage, and if we look back in automotive history and go back to the early 1900s up through the 30s, We had custom coach builders in this country. The companies that had been building carriages move over and start building custom bodies for automobiles. You had Murphy out in California, LeBaron bodies, all these different companies that were making custom bodies, doing essentially what Will's doing. I mean, building something that's not really, and this is a correlation here. Obviously, Will's starting with a body and customizing it, but in the future, when we look back, kind of like we look back now on custom bodied cars that customers could order, so hot rods that customers can order, these are custom ordered. These are things that the owner is choosing how to have them built, and another owner comes along. Okay, that guy wants to get rid of it. Another owner comes along, and he makes modifications to it. And it keeps going, and finally it gets to a point where this car is 100 years old, like some of the cars that have custom bodies, we're dealing with now. What is right and wrong in restoring that car, or do you or even having the right to do more custom work to it? Because the sole intention of that car when it was ordered back then, or be it the cars that Will's building now, was to have them the way the owner wanted them. So does the new owner have the right to customize it the way he wants it, or does it need to be restored or preserved to a certain point in its life?
Now, you make very good points in that, because I don't know how many of our listeners are aware, but if you ordered a Rolls-Royce or a Duesenberg or a Bugatti in that era, you got a chassis, and then you took it to a bodybuilder, and then you're right, they custom built you a piece to go on that. They sold you a frame, they sold you an engine, and how that frame and engine appeared to the general public was a lot your decision. And then you get into this, street rod industry began, and, as a product of World War II, and the guys that didn't go out and rush out and buy MGTCs and TDs, they went and bought the old Model Ts and Model As that weren't, went to the war effort, and built their belly tankers and their street rods. And now those cars are being respected. And, they've even had categories at Pebble Beach and Amelia Island in recent years. So there is the respect to them. And a lot of my more recent career is dealing with race cars. And those are cars that were built, crashed, modified on a weekly basis. So what is correct and what is wrong when you're doing that? So there's a lot of good points in looking at where we're at. So
at the end of the day, the man writing a check is generally always right. So you put it the way he wants it.
As somebody who is dependent on a man writing a check like that, I understand it, but it's, Derek and I playing in a museum world, we look at it a little bit. The person writing the check at the end of the day, they're not writing that $150,000 check to do the restoration. They're writing a $15 check or a $10 check, or to come in and see the product, and it has to be presented in such a way. So again, like I alluded to early, 3 different people, 6 different opinions on the idea, and I'm hoping hundreds of people listen to this, or thousands of people listen to this. It creates tens of thousands of opinions. We'll get some feedback from our listeners on what they think about, our opinions. I'll admit I'm wrong to some of you, and Derek's wrong to some of you, and Will's wrong to some of you. And then again, all 3 of us are right to some of you, and some of you are sitting there clamoring, going, I need my own podcast because I want to be a rebuttal, or I want to call in. Well, it's one of those things. And I'm told many times when people visit me at work that I do what they want to do, but there's a lot of stress in what we do. When it comes down to it, it is I think all the 3 of us have fun jobs. I don't think any of us would trade our jobs for anything. We earn a living really playing. I've come to the little saying, I don't think I've ever really worked a day in my life, because, what I do, people retire to do. What all of us do, people love to retire, or they go home and do on the weekends. As we've talked about, there's a lot of decisions and a lot of thinking that goes into every little decision that all of us make, whether it's building custom cars, whether it's doing a preservation, a conservation, a restoration, and things. So Do you guys agree or disagree, or as we begin to wind this down?
I agree 100%. Just because it's not your idea or it's not done the way you want it done, that don't make it wrong. So I respect I respect something about every car in the world, and that's just how I look at things. Just because I like it, that don't mean you have to like it, but it's my car. So
Yeah, and I mean, I agree 101% just because I want to agree more than Will.
So you agree 1.01?
But no, I agree because, again, there's a lot of decisions that go into this, and it's all based on what that owner or, what those of us in the museum world, whoever it is, the collector, whoever we're talking about, it's their passion. It's coming from the point of what they love and what they appreciate. And when you get right down to it, it doesn't matter if you're a tuner guy. It doesn't matter if you're a brass era horseless carriage guy. It doesn't matter if you're a street rodder. It doesn't matter what end of this hobby or interest or job or whatever this is to our listeners or anybody in it. We're all car people. And it's all about the cars, and we all have a different opinion on what we like and what we want to see done with our cars. But when you get down to it, we all have the same basic interest, and it's these fantastic machines that we can do so many things with.
I think with that, we're probably going to go ahead and wrap up for today. If you have questions or comments, email us at nodrivinggloves@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to No Driving Gloves using your favorite podcast catcher. Follow No Driving Gloves, one word, on Facebook or Instagram. And most of all, please check out our page on Patreon where you can help keep our tires rolling.